Hello, Tess. I just learned it's Tess Kunik.
Yes.
Kunik. Is Tess short for something? I'm curious.
Just Tess.
Tess.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so nice to meet you. And I want to start by saying I'm sorry for the loss of your sister.
Thank you.
It's very interesting that we're meeting right now and talking about this. It was just Saturday was the anniversary of the loss of my sister, which has been many years ago. For you, it's been what, 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Keeps very fresh, I'm sure, right now, right?
Yeah.
So, as that brings us to, how you got here, how did you find Jed?
Oh, how did I find Jed? Well, I found Jed after my sister passed away. One of our very dear family friends, Paula Dupree-Pessman, she runs a nonprofit in Colorado, which is where I'm from, and she helped us with my sister Liv's service. And for the service, we put together a bunch of footage. She was just a fire. She was just so much light. So we put a little, short film together for the service. And Paula, afterwards, she said, if you ever want help telling Liv's story, let me know. She's also a film producer. And my mom and I were like, yes, we would like to talk about this. I met the Jed Foundation through Paula in, from her filmmaker side and, working with clinicians to make the film as safe as possible and, really spread awareness without doing harm. And so I was lucky enough to come to the Jed offices in January of 2020 before the world changed.
Yeah, right before the world changed.
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey you've been on. I was reading on your site, the Liv Project. Your sister's name was Liv.
Yes.
Olivia, right?
Yeah.
And some things that really struck me were you said you wanted to spark fearless communication. Can you talk about what fearless communication means to you?
Yeah. I mean, it ultimately started because I was so afraid to talk to my sister about her depression and about her thoughts of suicide. And I was afraid to use the word suicide. I had that common myth in my head that if you say it, it's gonna put it in her brain, which, we know is not true. It really came from knowing how much fear I had around it and what I have learned since she died and how I've been able to kind of push past that fear to have these conversations. And so, our goal with the Liv Project is we need to be having these conversations. They're scary, but we need to push past that fear so we can talk.
I see your mom, Honey.
Yes.
Is very involved too, which to me was so striking because when it happened to my sister, 2 decades ago, there was such a stigma and a hush around it. The family didn't talk about it. I remember my dad saying, we're not going to tell the newspapers. We're not going to say how she died. So what was your family's reaction to, this? I love that your mom, you guys seem to be advocates. I mean,
Yes.
You are advocates
Yeah.
now. So can you talk about that, like the family's processing of it and willingness to be open about suicide?
Yeah, my mom kind of felt similarly. There was a lot of shame around, when Liv was struggling before she died. We felt a lot of shame and secrecy, don't tell anyone. And when she passed, we were like, we don't want to do that anymore. It caused so much damage. It will continue to cause damage. Let's talk about it. So my mom is the executive director of the nonprofit. Yeah. So
much of the key here is this sharing, talking about it, not normalizing it by any means, but we have to accept that, these numbers are going up. We've had a pandemic. I think young people have so much exposure to everything in the world that's going on, right and wrong.
Right.
And I think that's very anxiety inducing. But what I read about Liv, it seemed she outwardly lived this beautiful life. It looked great on paper, yet was struggling so much inside. When were you guys aware of that struggle? She started exhibiting signs of anxiety and OCD very young, like 3 or 4 years old, and had thoughts of self-harm around 8 years old and into middle school. And so there was a lot going on always, in and out of therapy, various medications,
But again, back to that shame. She didn't want anyone outside of our family to know. She didn't want her friends to know. That's why she was able to just, put on her smile, pretend everything was okay. And I think she also had a lot of shame of, knowing she had a great life and a loving family and, talent and friends, and would often say like, well, I have no reason to be sad. Yeah.
Yeah, like the guilt of, wait, I have no business. There's so many people suffering in the world. I have all of this.
Right.
I don't have the right to be unhappy. That's such a part of, I think, a struggle for so many young people, just not feeling entitled to ask for that help.
I think as a culture and society, we don't know how to listen. And I certainly didn't know how to listen to Liv when I would ask her things. I'd want to fix. I just want to fix it immediately. And sometimes it can't be fixed. And sometimes all people want is just a kind listening ear, to make them feel, that they're not alone.
I think a lot of people are afraid, like, I don't want to be the one telling on my friend.
Yes.
I have to feel it's okay to do that. I'm supposed to hold the secret, which is not helping the friend, but it's also hard for that giving friend to take that in alone on their own. So, in your idea of the Liv Project and what you hope for this trajectory of awareness and fearless communication, like you said, giving audiences the words to use, how can we tell young people it's okay? Like, when you hear this about a friend, what should they do?
It's a big question, but also like we got to know the answer to it. What should they do is they should connect with someone that they trust.
Be a connector.
Be a connector and listen, and then determine, with that person, okay, what's the next step? Do I need to reach out to an adult I trust? Do I need to, text crisis text line? Or do I need to call the suicide prevention lifeline? Do I have a therapist and I can, reach out to them and say, I'm really struggling. But yeah, just kind of normalizing that, like, it's okay to talk about these things. If I break my arm, my friend and I can talk and be like, you should really go to the doctor and get that checked out. If something is going on mentally or emotionally, we should be able to say something's going on, and let's try to figure out what's going on.
Mental health issues, they're health issues, right? If someone has a broken arm, they need a doctor, they need a surgery, they need a cast,
Yeah.
they need that help.
Yeah.
It's not obvious, like with your sister. I mean, it was to the family, so I guess you guys have probably learned quite a bit. But one thing that also struck me when I was looking at the site of the Liv Project, you said, you wanted this fearless communication and to give people the tools to talk about this productively and in ways that could also be kind of fun. And I love that there could be some levity here, because I think, we need that.
Yeah.
Where do you think the creative part comes into play? Because I know you're an artist.
Yeah.
And that speaks to me as well. And I'd love to hear what you think the creative and the fun part could be here in dealing with this.
Yeah. So, we really tried to come at it through this creative lens and really using creativity as a key to unlock these fearless conversations. And ultimately it came from, myself being an artist, my mom being an artist, Liv being an artist. We're a very creative family. In my own personal mental health struggles before my sister died, I always gravitated toward different art making. Making short experimental films about certain things I was going through, or, working with different artistic mediums to build a visual art piece when I was in a dark place. And there's connection there, right? So, when people are struggling, what they need most is connection. And that can be connection with people, or with yourselves. And a way to get that connection is through creativity.
What kind of help did you ask for and need and get? A little more of a modern time than when it happened to me. So what were some of the paths of your journey of healing and your family as well? But I'd love to start with you.
Yeah.
As a survivor.
Yeah, and I think survivor is such the right word for us, because it really is something that we have to get through every day, no matter how long it's been. Yeah, so my journey of healing, I think, is forever. It will continue to go on forever and evolve. But, you know, initially, I will say the support of my friends and family. One of my friends said something to me that changed the whole way I think about grief and talking to other people who are grieving is, do you want to talk about it or do you want me to distract you? And I was like, that's such an incredible invitation. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, so that was something that happened very early on after she passed that was helpful to me. And then also, getting into my creative self, dancing has really helped. I don't consider myself a dancer by any means. I've always been like a mover. But there's something about moving your body and just, sometimes you can't get the words out. So how can you get them out otherwise? So dance for me, and also painting. I've been doing a lot of painting without, thinking about an end product. Really just like, okay, I'm having a lot of thoughts and feelings. Let me just put it on a page. Yeah. And then, lots of support in therapy, individual therapy as well as group therapy, which has been really helpful for me.
Do you have a level of guilt? There's that survivor's guilt, and I'm sure for your mom it was very hard, like, knowing that there were issues so early on. Like, what would you say to another young person that you would meet that had gone through this and wasn't sure what to do?
The guilt is real, but it's also not our fault. So, I'm learning to hold both of those things at the same time. That, some days I replay things over in my head. What could I have done differently? What could I have said differently? The guilt creeps in, but also knowing I did the best I could. Our family did the best we could with what we knew at the time. And, ultimately, it's not our fault. So that's something that I continue to kind of to wrestle with, and I think talking with other survivors really helps me kind of diminish that guilt when it comes in.
Yeah, I know for me, not having a platform, like I said, generationally, it just was even more stigmatic, more taboo to talk about this. We were in a small town in, down south. And when I got to New York and after my sister died by suicide, it took me a little while to get my bearings, but I met this wonderful family who found me a therapist. And it was just, I didn't know any other survivors, but just understanding through therapy that, there wasn't much that could have been done at that point, and that guilt. And I love what you said about holding space for both, accepting that there's going to be those moments of guilt arising in your mind, as well as believing that it wasn't your fault. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? I mean, I know you're a teaching artist, you're a trained theater artist, but now here you are in the world of media.
Right.
And what is that feeling like? Is this part of the healing?
Totally. Yeah. And especially at the beginning of 2020 when COVID hit. Initially I was like, oh gosh, now I'm even more isolated than before. But, I'm tired of Zoom, and I'm sure everyone else is, but thank God for Zoom, because I was able to talk to so many people. And, I have met so many strangers over the past couple years that their stories have given me such peace for my own. Just like sharing that lived experience has been really, really healing, and especially sharing it with teens and young adults, and them, saying things like, this is my story, or I felt so alone in this. It's good to know I'm not.
To have lost your sister in 2020, 2 months later, the world shuts down, everybody's isolating, yet at the same time through, technology, social media, Zoom, you were able to connect with so many people that you might not have otherwise been able to connect to in a weird way, these weird silver linings. But, you know, that kind of brings me to the blessing and the curse of social media, right? You know, how can we make that a healthy and useful tool?
Yeah, it really is a double-edged sword. And every single day I'm like, okay, how do I do this? How do we continue to foster the good, and how do we, you know, weed out the negative? And I think in terms of the negative, I think there's a lot of societal things that need to be changed, legislation that needs to be changed. You know, in terms of the social media platforms themselves, things need to be changed to keep people safer. But what can we do? You know, what can I do as someone who uses social media or who is building this, you know, platform for my nonprofit and project? Is I have conversations with our youth advisors about and say, like, what's helpful for you when you go onto social media? And a lot of them say, like, we want real stories. We want real people talking to us. We want to talk. We want to share. So a lot of what we do on our social media is, you know, have it be a platform for these young folks to share what they're going through. Also, you know, riding that fine line of, you know, toxic positivity, not being like, everything's great, you're gonna have a great day. You know, like riding that balance of being real that sometimes it sucks.
Exactly.
And you're gonna feel terrible, and I'm so sorry. And what are some things that we can do to get out of that? So we're trying, you know, to curate our own personal social media to look like that, but it's a huge problem. And I know for me personally, in my own relationship with social media, it has become tough to deal with
How so?
in terms of like constantly comparing myself to other people, or, you know, going onto Instagram on my phone when I didn't even think about it, and then I'm just on the app and I'm like, how did I get here? Why am I here? What's happening? Or just like losing time scrolling. And you know, I know social media is not to blame for, you know, everything, but I do know that it had a big impact on my sister and her mental health, and specifically body image. And, you know, something that is so infuriating to me is all of the doctored images that we are seeing constantly, and how they're just not real, you know? Or people have glam squads that make them look this way. They've got full teams, or, you know, there's so much editing that goes into it, and I think it can be really damaging for young people, and certainly Liv, to think that that is what reality is.
As a touring artist, musician, like life on the road is brutal. But we post the highlights. It's the highlight reel. And I remembered, my family, people would write, "I want your life. That looks so amazing." Meanwhile, I was really struggling. This was, years ago, and I wasn't happy out there for a lot of reasons. And, it took for me finding a mental health regimen. For me, it was meditation, getting the right amount of sleep, talking to friends. I joined a Buddhist study program, so I always had a support of people. But I do remember, like, wow, here I felt so dishonest putting out the highlight reel on Facebook and realizing that, like, that was making some people feel kind of badly. But then you have that fine line where, as an artist and a performer, no one wants to hear "this sucks today" and tonight.
Right.
So, here you are, it's 2020, you've just lost your sister, 2 months later the world shuts down. All you have is basically social media, your technology, your smartphone, your iPhone. How did you navigate that for yourself?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was, kind of twofold. I think, like the story feature on Instagram and the close friends feature was really interesting for me, because I was able to, like, do kind of these confessional things where I'm like, today is the worst. I don't know how I'm gonna get through today. I can't even get out of bed. And, my close friends would see it, and they would reach out and we could have a conversation. And that was helpful because sometimes, at that moment in time, I couldn't say, hey, I need you to support me right now. I'm really struggling. And so, that was a way for me to kind of figure out and navigate what I was feeling, and those who I trusted could come back and be like, what's going on? But also, like, after my sister died, I really curated my feed in a different way. I stopped following people that made me feel super bad about myself. I started following a lot of more like art accounts, or people who I really respect and admire, or just like silly meme accounts, so that when I am scrolling, it's less of things that make me feel bad and more of things that fill my soul.
What would you say to another young person who's struggling with what Liv struggled with, what you've just expressed struggling with, like looking at social media and going, oh, like comparing yourself and feeling like a loser, you know, we do that.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Oh, it's the worst.
It's the worst.
It's the worst. And, I heard someone say recently, like, have you ever gone on social media and then felt better? And I was like, I don't think I have. I don't think so.
Is there a way to have, to go on social media and actually feel better? Like, so you've already pointed some things out, like these accounts where you can just kind of have your confessional, get some support. How do you think young people can have a healthier relationship with social media, especially people dealing with mental health issues? There's got to be a way in there that offers someone that support, that connectivity that you're talking about without the toxicity.
I mean, I think the first thing I would say is like, have a conversation with your friends about it, back to that fearless conversation. Like, I'm having a really hard time going on Instagram or TikTok and feeling this way. You might be surprised because they might say the exact same thing.
If they're honest, wouldn't they all say it at some point?
Right.
Adults and kids alike, I think.
Yeah, totally. And kind of asking each other, like, what do you do when this happens? Or like sharing certain things of like, okay, when I come across this, I know I put my phone down and then I just step outside and like sit in my yard. So I think talking to each other about it, and also knowing like, you do, as much as the algorithm has all the control, we do still have some control in terms of what and who we follow.
It coincides entirely with talking about your mental health issues. Just telling a friend, I'm having this really dark thought right now. And I think that's the beginning of this fearless conversation we're talking about. And obviously, when something as catastrophic as the loss of a family member by suicide, or suicide happens like this, we can forget our own selves along the way. Do you ever feel like you struggled with mental health?
I struggled with anxiety too when I was a very little kid, like 7. It came up in like stomach pains. We all, my mom was like, what is going on with your stomach? Came to find out it was anxiety. And also, body image and disordered eating. I struggled a lot with that. My parents got divorced when I was 12, which is, what an age. So I definitely struggled with some disordered eating and some depression there. And I didn't really realize how similar my struggles and my sister's struggles were until after she died. Wow. She was 8.5 years younger than me. I always had this very, big sister role. And her struggles were, as kind of invisible as mental health struggles are, hers were more visible than mine. And I think I often kind of tucked mine away, because of all the reasons, shame, not wanting to add more to everyone's plates. I can handle this on my own, which is never the case. Personally, I can never handle it on my own. And, since she died, I've really gone on such a roller coaster in terms of my own mental health. And what you're saying about like, we can kind of forget about ourselves. I think, that first year I really did forget about myself. I mean, I felt like a totally different person. And there were these times where I couldn't tell what was grief and what was depression, and were they morphing together? And, I've been on antidepressants since before my sister died to, manage my own mental health. And so that was really confusing for me when she died, because I didn't know, I was trying to categorize, like, okay, these feelings are about my grief. This is about my depression, when it's all still related. It just is now more complicated.
Have you made some progress on doing those, on, making some separation, or or accepting that they're all mixed in together anyway?
Yeah, I've kind of accepted, like, all right, this grief, this loss is an added layer to my mental health trajectory. And it's interesting. This is kind of off topic, but kind of on topic, but it just came to my head was, I had my first thoughts of suicide myself a couple months ago, which was unrelated to my sister's passing. It was, a big kind of personal crisis I was going through, and it was the first time I understood, oh my gosh, like these feelings are coming up, and what do I do? And I'm afraid of these thoughts. And it made me, one, understand her in a way that I never did before. It definitely reduced some of that guilt that we were talking about earlier, because when I was having these thoughts, it wasn't about anyone else. I just couldn't handle the pain I was currently in. And then, doing all this work around fearless conversation and communication and asking for help, that was like a huge thing for me. I remember one day just sitting in a chair in my house for like 4 hours, trying to come up with who to reach out to and what to say to them. And it just it took my whole day.
To be an advocate for yourself.
To be an advocate for myself. And I'm like, I've learned all these things. I, know how to be there for other people. But then when it came to myself, I was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It's so much easier for me to be there for others. And that day I was really, I didn't, it's almost hard to put into words because it was so intense. And, finally getting up the courage to reach out and be like, I need you to come over and just sit here with me. I don't want to talk. I don't want us to do anything. I just need to know that you're in the room with me while I can continue to get through this.
I'm so glad you shared that. That's not only on point, but it's so powerful. You as an advocate, having done all of this work, putting everything into place for others, find yourself in this vulnerable position and you freeze at first, right?
Yeah.
How long did it take before you actually able to reach out and make that call?
At least 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do we advise someone to try to do that a little sooner? What do we say?
I know.
That's a painful 4 hours.
It is. It is. Yeah. I would encourage people to reach out sooner, because the second you do, at least for me, I felt relief. I didn't feel better completely, but I was like less afraid of the thoughts that I was having, because they weren't just mine to hold anymore. I could sit with someone with them.
When we share those feelings, we share the burden. It just gets lighter. Everybody gets a little piece of it
Right.
and holds it for us, right?
Right. And I would also say, it's hard to remember in the moment, but it is temporary. The next day, when I tell you I felt different, I really felt, I was like, okay, this was a thing that happened and it's not forever. And it may come up again, but it won't stay forever. That sense of it feels like it's forever in the moment, but it's not. And if we could, that's something I want to say to so many people and remind them of, and remind myself, this is temporary.
It's a great mantra. You know, I know from my own experience, I have also struggled with anxiety a good part of my life, and it would often hit in the middle of the night, that witching hour. And I finally got to the point where I was like, I know now when I get up and have my coffee, these feelings are gone, and they always are. For some people, obviously, they linger a little longer. And that sharing is so crucial with friends. And of course, for your sister, you said she didn't want anybody to know. Mm-hmm. How do we penetrate that? Like, how do we get someone that is so locked into the shame and the stigma and the unwillingness to talk, that fear?
Having had experienced those thoughts, like if I could say to my sister, I get it. It is excruciating and it is terrifying. And also, it will pass. It will pass. Because I couldn't say that to her before. I didn't get it. You know, a lot of my conversations with her were like, how can we fix this? Your life is great. Let's, you know, which is not what anyone wants to hear when they're going through something like that.
So this was just 2 months ago. You had this very powerful.
Yeah.
You know, it could come up again, right? We know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what are you doing now to really protect yourself and?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in some pretty intense therapy, both individually and in group therapy settings, which I love group therapy. I'm always so nervous whenever I go in, and then I leave being like, this is amazing.
Because you're sharing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're sharing when you're also listening, you know, like the number of head nods that happen in that room is so validating. And also, you know, doing the work in between those sessions, you know, journaling. You know, I have a big thing with like intrusive thoughts. I also have OCD, so I can ruminate on something till the end of time, which is not helpful.
No.
And so, you know, kind of looking at those thoughts as like, it happened, let me write them down and let me walk away. Or let me, you know, have a healthy distraction right now, be it painting or gardening or just like turning on a show, and just kind of, you know, not ignoring the thought. I acknowledged it and put it on the paper, and now I'm gonna.
Because what we resist will persist.
And
right?
it will grow.
And it will grow and fester. That is such an important point to acknowledge. I'm having this feeling. You know I had so many friends in recovery, and one of the slogans, feelings are not facts. Of course, these little slogans are helpful, but we have to be with the mind already open to them. And when we're in the throes of something, if we don't have any experience or familiarity with how to get out of it, it does seem impossible. It does seem like, no, this feeling is not only a fact, and it's never changing. It's not temporary either. It's so easy to believe that in the moment. What else? What else do you do to acknowledge, okay, this feeling is arising. It's not who I am. It's going to eventually pass. It might take hours. It might take days. It might take weeks. It might take months.
I think a very specific example in terms of this recent, you know, crisis I went through was when thoughts of self-harm would come up, I would go straight to my paper and I would paint. And I would scribble and I would scratch the page and just get out all of those things, not on myself, but on something else. And that was really freeing for me as an artist who's like, I have to have everything perfect. I want to, you know, this is my vision. It wasn't about a vision. It was simply about putting my energy elsewhere that wasn't going to hurt myself.
And you know your way in. So what that says to me is, if we could tell people one thing, find your way in, because not everybody's an artist, right? What can you do healthy? What is a healthy distraction for you? You know, and as somebody, you're also a teaching artist, a theater teaching artist, so it's all about understanding the multiple intelligences and
right.
the diversity of, you know, all beings. Mm-hmm. How do we help them find their way in?
Yeah. I I would say like start with curiosity. You know, if you don't have a thing where you're like, oh, I'm an artist, or oh, you know, I want to go run when I'm feeling something. If you're like, those aren't for me, sit with yourself and get curious about like, what are the things that make you feel not just good, but like safe. You know, I know for my husband, it's video games. Like that can just calm him in a way that, you know, it wouldn't calm me.
No,
I'm like, I don't know what these buttons mean.
Crazy.
Right. So like follow, you know, listen to, ask yourself what you're drawn to. And then, you know, it's back to that connection. Like what we need most is connection. Yes, to other people, but also to ourselves.
I love what you said. Sit down and get curious. And then, of course, get professional help.
Totally.
Through therapy, we can find what sort of interests we have, right? Really appreciate you sharing that 2-month ago crises for you. And also the fact that, you know, you've had a relationship with medication, antidepressants,
Yes.
right? And you started them even before the loss
Yeah.
of your sister. How, you know, there's still a taboo around that as well, unfortunately. I've heard young people talk about being on medication and, oh, I know I need to get off. And I say, why? If it's helping, you know, what do you feel like? How's your relationship around that? Are you okay with it?
I am. It was a weird relationship to begin. I had always been resistant because I thought, I don't need it. When it's okay to be like, maybe I do need it. And I was lucky enough, the first medication I tried really worked for me.
That is very lucky.
Yeah. And I know for my sister, it was not the case. So it has helped me so much in terms of kind of like my racing thoughts. You know, not just my depression, but also these other things that I experienced, like my anxiety and my OCD. And, you know, there was a time before my sister died where I said, I think I'm ready to, you know, I don't think I need them anymore. And so I, with my doctor, went off them, and I was off them for like 2 months, and I was like, oh, I do need these. You know, I thought I, you know, was ready, and I'm not, and that's okay.
If we took the taboo away from medication, do you think we'd see an increase in people getting that kind of help?
I think so.
So the taboo is still there, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not nearly what it was. When I was your age, a lot of the medication didn't exist, and you were just nuts. You know?
Even though there is a taboo, I am seeing a lot of my peers talk about it more, and that makes me so excited. I'm like, yeah, you're talking about whatever you're on. This is the SSRI I'm on. Like, no way. How has it helped you?
It's becoming normalized.
Yeah. So there's still that taboo, but I am seeing it become a little more normalized.
When you started medication, were you in talk therapy yet?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. So I had been in therapy as a child, and then when I started medication, I also started seeing a new therapist, and that's when I started group therapy the first time, and it was so helpful.
I'm really happy to hear you say that, because I think also part of the reason there's a stigma around medication is because there's been too often an abuse of it, where it's just like, let me just pop a pill that's going to make me feel better, but I'm not going to talk to anybody. The pill's just going to do it for me. And we have to get rid of that notion.
Yeah.
Because I think the two need to go together, right?
Totally. And in fact, my pill specifically helps me be able to talk more openly.
And there you have that, right? It does, because the inhibitions are, you know, those intrusive thoughts that you...
Yeah, they're not as loud.
They're not as loud.
Yeah.
I love that. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So you're still in talk therapy now?
Yes.
Okay. And you're okay with increasing your medication?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
And you're finding more people that are comfortable talking about this. And obviously you're a big advocate to get people to continue talking about it.
Yeah.
When I lost my sister, I found that, you know, right away when there's a loss and everybody's gathering around, that's a distraction. Then when the dust settles a little bit, it gets a little harder. Have you experienced that?
Totally. Yeah. It's like when the casseroles stop coming.
Yes.
I remember
That's a book title. Or
totally, right?
There you go. You think of that with your creative writing. When the casseroles stop coming. I love that. I had to point that out. Sorry, go ahead.
I just remember looking at like a stack of Tupperwares on my counter, empty Tupperwares that I had to return to people. And I was like, no more casseroles are gonna come, huh? You know, like we've reached the period of where people reach out, which is very painful. And also I get it. I mean, we don't know how to grieve in our society. We don't talk about it. We don't let ourselves. And I would say, and I'm curious, you know, about your experience, but the third year, like hitting year 3 this January, felt like a thaw. Like I had been in shock for 2 years. And in a way, that shock was kind of protecting me.
Yes.
And then 3 years hit and it just melted away. And I was like, I'm not shocked anymore. And also, this is forever.
Now it hurts.
Yeah.
On a deep core level. Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. You know, once that shock wore off and the grief hits a different level, because you realize, yes, it's forever. I'm never going to see their face in 3D again. I'm never going to hear their voice. This is final. You know, and everybody says time heals, time heals. It eventually does. And I found, you know, after my sister and I would dedicate this song I wrote to her, it changed. I would get very choked up for a while talking about it, and then it just became more of a mission. So I imagine your advocacy is going to get deeper and stronger, and it's going to really live nicely with that memory of your sister. That was my experience using the stage as my platform, becoming a JED ambassador. The part of the grief around that shock wearing off and the casseroles no longer coming and the support dying out, and I'm just another, you know, for me, it was at one point, oh, I'm just another statistic in this, because that morphs into something if you continue, which obviously you're going to continue your advocacy, and I have a feeling it's going to go far and wide, Tess. I mean, as long as you don't forget about yourself, right?
Yes.
You know, we always find that what we used to call blessings in disguise, there is always some silver lining. What would be a few for you with this adventure you've been on called life?
Yeah. First and foremost, that my vulnerabilities and emotions are not something to be ashamed of. I was a very sensitive child, you know, loved theater and was always, you know, considered a drama queen, and had a lot of shame about that. And in sharing my story and in sharing Liv's story, I found that that's not the case. It's actually a superpower to be able to share yourself. Also, I've learned how to talk about my mental health and suicide in ways I didn't before. I've become a much better listener to other people, and I've learned how to ask the question of those I'm worried about, you know, are you having thoughts of suicide? And if they say yes, sitting with them and not trying to fix it. And then also, you know, bringing myself into it, of reaching out when I need to, and hopefully closing that gap of, you know, it took 4 hours that one time.
Please.
Can it be almost immediate next time?
What would you say your hopes are for the, let's just say, near future, you know?
I mean, I hope we can reduce the stigma. I see it happening.
Yeah, I do too.
Little by little, and I'm hopeful that it will continue to happen, and maybe not just little by little, but in big ways. Young people give me hope. I mean, when I, you know, teach theater to these little kids, and just, they know how to be open with their feelings,
Right.
you know? I'm so hopeful when I work with them, and I'm hopeful when I talk to teens and listen to their stories and their solutions. A lot of them say, you know, like, these are the things we have to do. That brings me so much hope.
That's amazing.
You know, that it's not just talking about our feelings, but also what we do afterward.
You know, to me, you're a young person, and I have found this conversation with you very hopeful. I'm like, 'cause with 2 little kids at home, I'm like, okay, it's not all bleak. There is hope. We just have to stay. We have to stay diligent, don't we?
Yeah.
We have to really stay diligent for ourselves and for others. Be that listening friend, that giving friend, that helping friend to ourselves and others, right?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts you want to share?
The moments of joy in my life make the moments of missing her so much deeper. I got married at the end of 2020, which was amazing. And also, she wasn't there. And that was so painful. And, you know, I'm curious how you navigate, you know, the beauty and joys of having a family. And
it's such a good question. One of the things that I took of my sister's belongings, which were very few, when we got the call, and I lived not far away, and my now music partner drove me to the place where she had been found. And all of her stuff was just like kind of scattered about, and there was this little red camera. And I just wanted that camera. Whew. I haven't thought about this in years. No, it's okay. It's a beautiful memory. And after that, like, I really got my life together. And everywhere I went, I really got into the outdoors. I would go on hikes, camping, swimming in rivers. I took pictures with that camera everywhere till it finally went kaput, but I had it for years. I just think knowing she was always with me and that she gave me a gift to carry on with. We both had a dream of doing music together, so here I was. Her death was my wake-up call because I was taking a really dark road, drugs, all of it. And after that, I knew I had to live with a purpose. The stage, doing music, writing songs about humanity became my mission in life. And she's with me every time I'm on stage. And it's so uncanny. Her favorite band was Queen. I remember my first few shows, braving, doing my own songs, mainly the ones I wrote about her. I remember this rock club, it was packed. I was having terrible anxiety. All of a sudden, they started playing Queen. And I was like, she's here. So I just look for those moments where she's with me. And your sister did the same thing for you. She was like, okay, I couldn't do this, but you can. And we're doing it for them too.
Yeah.
We're honoring them. And they gave us so much strength. You know, I don't know if that's a terrible thing to say when someone dies by suicide, but obviously they left. And I think they left us with something to carry that they couldn't.
totally.
And here we are. But we have to take care of ourselves and know that, like, sometimes it's going to be hard to carry. We're going to have to ask people, can you help me carry this a little bit?
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry to throw that on you. I was just
No.
like, oh,
I
talk
forgot about
grief.
that little red camera. I'm so glad you asked. Thank you.
What was her name?
Dana. Oh, maybe somewhere in this world of ethereal, they're Dana and
They're
Liv
playing
hanging
music
out.
together.
Yeah, they're just jamming.
Yeah,
I believe
probably.
it. I'll take it.
I will too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tess.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome.